All right, I've got time to start. Good morning, everybody. I hope you are doing well. And so this was a great week for us. We ended up doing training for the Ukrainian project managers, and so we had project managers from Ukraine tapping in. Had such a good time with them, just trying to encourage them a little bit, helping them get ready for the recovery. Hopefully, that will happen pretty close down the road here. And so it was just a lot of fun being able to talk with them and just to be able to interact with all the various project managers out of Ukraine. So that was an awesome week. So I hope you had a good week as well. So today we're going to be talking about effectively running Agile or Scrum ceremonies. Now, for most of us, many of you maybe who have been in the industry for a long time, you probably cut your teeth on traditional, and most of us did because that has been around for such a long time. And then a number of years ago, you probably started hearing about Agile and Scrum. And so right around the year of 2000, latter 90s, early 2000, you started hearing about Agile and Scrum. And of course, it was already being played with some people, by some of your software developers and stuff, but they were starting to formalize it in that time. So it really began to start picking up speed. And then in the last 3 years, it has just exploded even more in growth. And so I don't see this going away. This is not, this is not a knee-jerk kind of situation where people are using this temporarily. I think these are bona fide frameworks or methodologies that people are going to be using as options. And so, as a project manager, if you're already certified and trained on the in the Agile side, on the traditional side, you're probably going to want to have some of the training and things over on the Agile or Scrum side over time to be able to add to your resume and different things. Now today, let's walk through some of this and kind of lay some foundation for you. So let me start off first off, in case I've got anyone on here who's not real familiar with Agile and Scrum, and it happens all the time, let me lay the foundation for you. And so Agile and Scrum project frameworks have specific qualities about them. Now, I'm going to talk about them from the purest standpoint here, but those that you've been exposed to maybe are not as detailed as some of these, because you might actually be working more in a hybrid situation, and I get that. So many of us do. And so the scope evolves through the project. Projects are run in sprints or iterations ranging most of the time from 1 to 4 weeks. Teams are high functioning, making decisions about the project. Value and speed that support change are the drivers really of this project. Customers are embedded within the team, and the roles typically are going to include a Scrum Master, a product owner, and maybe the development team. And so those are typically the roles. So if you happen to be working on Scrum or Agile or a hybrid type project, you probably have noticed that you might have a project manager in the mix, or you might not have a Scrum Master. You might have someone else in the mix, a quality person. So a lot of those, we have a lot of different flavors because of all the hybrid stuff that all of us have to do on our projects. And so there's nothing wrong with that. You use that as you need for your project. But when we're talking about pure Agile or pure Scrum specifically, we're really talking about Scrum Master, a product owner, and the development team. Now, Scrum is considered a framework. And so most of their literature, when we talk about Scrum, which is the most popular Agile framework or methodology that we're looking at, is really, they call themselves a framework because of the versatility. They don't really call themselves a methodology because a lot of times the connotation of a methodology brings to the fact that we want to have processes that we run on each and every project. And of course, Scrum and Agile, the reason why people use them is for that free flow of being able to make the adjustments in the project, normally due to change orders, which drive us all crazy on the traditional ones, but we want them to have that flexibility. And so that's why most of the time when you're talking about Agile or Scrum, they'll call it a framework, not so much a methodology. Most researchers in project management place Agile as a category, Scrum as the most popular Agile framework or methodology. And the reason behind that is because Scrum has just exploded, even though technically Scrum has actually been around longer. So let's take a look at what we're talking about when we say a Scrum or an Agile framework. And so this is going to fit mostly with Scrum here. So you've got customer input into the project. You're going to have features or user stories normally, because Scrum seems to work best with product development, software development, any of those things where you're kind of hitting that moving target. Those of you who are involved in very creative things, you can see how this gives you that flexibility to do what you need to do, because once again, you're being creative and trying to produce something maybe that's never been produced before. And then the role of the product owner. And So the product owner happens to be the person who works probably the closest with the customer, but the product owner is in charge of the product, what's called the product backlog. The product backlog is nothing more than the pot of features or the pot of user stories that's going to be utilized in this project. And so the role of the product owner is to work with the customer, and when the customer wants the next series of features or user stories to be completed, the product owner is constantly refining those product features and user stories, and then working with the team to make sure they deliver that in the next iteration. And so the product owner plays a very significant role here. And so you've got a product backlog that's really controlled by the product owner, a person, not really a committee. And then what you'll notice is that they'll have what's called sprint planning. Now, sprint planning is what you're going to be doing, because you're going to be deciding what features or user stories are going to be done in which sprint. Your product owner is usually the one responsible for this, but it's not like they do it in a in a chasm. They're going to be talking to the team, the project team, because the team is doing the estimation component and the product owner is doing the ranking representing the customer. So there's got to be that collaboration between the two of those. And so once they do the sprint planning and decide what's going to be covered in a sprint, then they begin that sprint. That sprint's going to take somewhere between 1 to 4 weeks. And the Scrum Master is going to facilitate a lot of the meetings, make sure people are following whatever the framework or the methodology is. But typically what you'll notice is that people try not to have changes in the middle of a sprint, a 1 to 4 week sprint. And the reason for that is because it creates such a chaotic atmosphere. And so the customer and the product owner and the team have to be on board for, we're going to complete these 15 features in these 4 weeks without change orders. Now, there's exceptions to a lot of different things, as you know, and typically you don't want those changes. If you run out of funding, then obviously you're going to stop the sprint. If the product owner comes back and says, okay, we've had these major, crisis that's happened, so we've got to change things, you're going to change some stuff or stop a sprint. But in general, that sprint's going to run without anybody messing with it, so that the team can pick up the velocity of getting some of those features off to the customer as fast as possible, which is value to the customer and also sets the customer up to be able to give feedback on how the team is doing and whether they're meeting the objectives that they want. And so then every morning, normally is when you have it. You can have it at other times, but typically people talk about it in the morning time. You'll have what's called a daily Scrum. Daily Scrum is a 15-minute meeting that the team will have together, and they will talk about what they finished yesterday, what they're going to do today, and what kind of challenges are they experiencing or impediments. So when they talk about the challenges and the impediments, this is not a problem-solving session, okay? So don't mistake it for that. It's time boxed for 15 minutes only. The team does that so it holds each other accountable, but it also allows you to surface what some of those challenges are. And then the next day, people stand up and do the exact same thing, what they finished yesterday, what they're doing today, and what are the impediments. And then, of course, you will do at the end of each sprint what's called a sprint review or a sprint demo. Now, depending on some of the authors, some people will actually split these two into two separate things. But most people in the area of Scrum will call it a sprint demo or review, because you're demonstrating the features to the customer from that sprint that you're finishing, and the customer is then going to get those features to begin working with. And then the very last thing that you'll have is what's called the sprint retrospective. So at the end of each 4-week sprint, you're going to have a retrospective. Now, that's not a big deal, because retrospective, you're familiar with the term lessons learned. That's a lessons learned in the Scrum area. So you are going to be doing a Scrum retrospective. You and your team are going to talk about what you would do different, what was good, what was bad, just like you would in a lessons learned. And you're learning from one Scrum, one iteration in Scrum to the very next one. And then at the end of the entire project, you will actually do a project Scrum at the end to encompass the entire project. And then everything in that retrospective is feeding right back into everything you're doing, into the product backlog. Might make a difference on what we're having to do because we didn't do something very good. So now we're having to say, okay, we got to redo this. What order does the customer want us to redo it? But the product owner gets some of that information too, because everybody's sharing what went well, what didn't go well in that situation. Now, in Agile and Scrum, sometimes there's a little bit of misunderstandings and confusion. So let's deal with that a moment. So running sprints sprints which are 2 to 4 months long. I wanted to specifically show you a range here. There are people that are many techs that are out there talking about sprints that they are running that are months and months long. And so I want to deal with that this morning, because that is not something that's recommended. That's something that really sets a lot of people up for struggles in other areas. The reason why sprints are normally set to 1 to 4 weeks is so that you can deliver value to the customer quickly and get them something fast. The whole issue here is speed and value. The longer the sprint or the longer the iteration, the higher the possibility is that you're going to have change orders. And when you start talking about 3 and 4 month sprints, and there's always exceptions, I'm sure, but when you're talking 3 or 4 month sprints, you're almost running that so-called Scrum project like you're running a traditional in phases. And so that's what you're not wanting to do, because you're going to have change orders in a 4 month phase. You're going to have change orders. So what you're trying to do is, what can I get to them in these next 4 weeks? And then the next 4 weeks, what can I get to that customer? And then the next, what can I get to that customer? So you're trying to build a velocity of value to that customer, coming with feedback so that we can adjust and hit that target the customer wants. So creating a project plan showing all the sprints for the entire project is really not part of Scrum. You would not say, okay, we're going to do 45 sprints, and here's what's going to be completed at each one of those, and this one's going to start on December 1st and it's going to finish on the 28th. That's not in Scrum. Even though I've seen people show it to me, that's really not a Scrum thing. And the reason is because you're trying to adjust and you're trying to allow people to shift. So establishing a formal change control process is not really a Scrum thing, because the customer is talking to the product owner and the team's talking to the product owner, and that group has power to decide what needs to be done, adjusted, and so forth, and you have the customer embedded in that team. Also, appointing a project manager to run the project, that's not really a Scrum or an Agile thing. That's more of a hybrid kind of project. And not anything wrong with hybrid, don't mistake what I'm saying. But normally, a lot of times people will interpret this as Scrum. Well, we've got a project manager and we run Scrum. You're probably running hybrid, I get it. And it's not saying that's not right for you. You maybe need that project manager on that. Or inheriting estimates from various features or user stories. That's not really a Scrum or an Agile thing. Why? Because the team is really the one that's doing the estimation. Let me just refresh your memory. The product owner says, we want these 15 features. The team looks at those 15 features and says, okay, we can do that in 3 weeks. And so, but let's say they have all agreed to do a 4-week iteration. Then there'd be the product owner's job to take some of the next list of high priority features that he or she has, and they would add it to it. Okay, so now we've got a 4-week sprint, and this looks like enough features for that. And over time, you can tell, based on what's called a velocity, the average of what that team's going to produce each 4 weeks or 3-week sprint, whatever you've decided to do. Now, the benefits of using Agile and Scrum: some projects require numerous adjustments to bring value to the customer. The scope of work may evolve over time. That's one of the challenges that we've all had. And then Agile and Scrum projects allow for this uncertainty that we get into. And so it gives you flexibility to handle some of the changes without getting locked into a command and control type of methodology like traditional does, and also get us locked into where we're having to pay out the wazoo over change requests. So that's going to be one of those pieces. Agile and Scrum also bring value to the customer faster by giving prototypes and handoffs, and the customer seeing something and at an earlier rate. So that's what they're talking about when they're saying bring value. The cool thing about this thing is that if you are wrong, it's going to make you wrong faster. And that's why people love this, is because if what we're producing is not what the customer wants, they're saying not even close, then we're producing something different. And we're not waiting 18 months into the project to show them something and the customer says, yeah, that's not it. All right. Also, the other benefit would be change is supported. It's managed into the process because your team has flexibility, the product owner and the customer has flexibility, and the customer receives more of what they want at a faster speed. So that's the reason why you're seeing Agile and Scrum. And don't mistake what I'm saying here. Agile and Scrum are not going to fit every project. There's some projects that would not and should not use Agile or Scrum. Absolutely. But there are some that you will find yourself in that hybrid situation like many of you might be doing. And then there are some that are flat out Scrum projects, and they need that level of flexibility running all the way through. So with that foundation, now let's introduce you to some of the tests, ceremonies associated with this. So the first ceremony is going to be what's called sprint planning. We'll go through every one of these: sprint planning, daily stand-ups, the sprint demo or the review, the sprint retrospective, and then the product backlog refinement. That used to be called product backlog grooming in some of the older material. And so you might be familiar with that. Well, now it's called refinement is the new term that's there. So let's begin with sprint planning. Sprint planning makes sense to most of us because planning is such a strong initiative, even in the traditional project. So in sprint planning, it's completed just before the sprint begins. So the idea that we're going to create a plan 18 months out and run a Scrum project is not even a component of this type of mindset. So we're going to complete the sprint. That allows us to make changes all the way up until we get ready to hand that sprint plan off, or that sprint backlog off, to the team for them to be able to start it. And so we've got that flexibility all the way up. So those of you who work on those projects to where you're hitting that moving target and people are waiting on information before they set certain goals or objectives, that's the reason why people are using this, is so you've got that last minute adjustment that you can make. There's no master list of sprints or content for the entire project because the sprint backlog is constantly changing after that sprint is over. So when we finish that sprint, the customer might say, there are 3 things here that's not really working the way we want. That could be part of the very next sprint if the product owner wants it there and the customer wants it there, or it could go to the bottom of the list because the customer says, well, those particular features are not my highest features right now. Let's do something different. So the customer is always controlling what you're really working on next for that next iteration. And so the product owner is always representing that customer there. And so they represent the customer on the priority of the features, the user stories, the output, whatever it is, and the team will be the ones estimating the work. So the product owner can't come with 100 features and say, guess what, folks, I need this stuff by next week. You're not going to see any of that because the team is doing the estimating, the product owner's doing the ranking, representing the customer for that. Also in the sprint planning, features, story points, user stories are refined by the product owner for the creation of the sprint backlog. The sprint backlog contains the team's velocity and seeks to align with that guideline. Now, here's the challenge that you have, and those of you who are doing this, I know I'm speaking to the choir here because you already know this, that your velocity takes a few sprints to catch on to. You're not going to have a sprint velocity on the first sprint because you don't know how fast some of this is going to work. And so you've got an idea, you've done some estimating, but especially if it's a brand new product, a brand new features that we've never done before. So it's going to take most of the experts will say three sprints to start coming up with what your real velocity is. And so I'm not to take a velocity from someone else and put it on our team. Well, that team does 40 every sprint, and so you guys need to do 40. That's not even realistic. It's a different project. So you create an agenda for the sprint planning meeting to discuss the sprint backlog. People talk about the good and the bad. What are they concerned about with it? You talk about risk. It might be part of that. And then you discuss the ownership of the various aspects of the work that's going to be completed in that sprint backlog. And so all of those components, people are being either assigned, suggested to, or volunteering, depending on the flavor of your culture, to the work in that sprint backlog. You're going to examine the resource calendar. Who else needs to work on this? You're going to verify the resources are available, obviously, to do these particular things. A lot of this might be some of the specialization parts. It could be quality. It could be your programmers. Do you have a programmer doing what they're supposed to be doing here that's free to do this? And then giving you normally will give an overview of the sprint backlog, discuss ownership of the various work items, gain consensus from the team, and then set the sprint time box. Is this a 3-week interval? Is this going to be a 4-week? And that time box is locked in. What does that mean? It means that at the end of 4 weeks, if that's a 4-week time box, we do not keep going. So let's say there's 15 features that we're working on, but we only finish 13 and the time runs out. What do? We extend it for 2 to get those other 2? Not at all. The time box is locked in. So at 4 weeks, it stops. We hand those 13 off to the customer. They start working with them. Those other 2 go back to the product owner and the customer. Where do they want those? If they want us to do a little 1-week sprint and do those, we can do that, or they can put it back into the product backlog. So you set the sprint time box. And so when's it going to start? When's it going to finish? And then you begin the sprint. Now, the sprint dashboard, planning dashboard, will look something like this, just to kind of give you a little sample. So you've got attendees, you've got agenda items, and then you've got the duration. So normally a sprint planning session will last somewhere between 1 to 2 hours. And so each 2 hours sprint duration. And so people will invest a few hours to do this planning. And so depending on who you read, they'll change this just a little bit, but this is just to kind of give you kind of a little bit of a baseline. And so it's normally done right at the beginning of the iteration. And of course, you can use other frameworks too to be part of this, but duration would be 1 to 2 hours for each 2 hour sprint duration. And so you would end up expanding that for how many hours you're going to work on that sprint. And so a 4-week sprint, you would have somewhere around almost 8 hours possibly invested if it's very difficult. So you're trying to put that structure in there in this situation. Now, here are some of the benefits of the sprint planning. You focus on the iteration on the next most important feature or the user story. So you're always working on the highest priority. It creates clarity on the sprint goals, and it selects work that the team verifies and makes sense for sprint completion. So the team is able to talk through what the customer is wanting, and to be able to have that verbalized in that meeting, to be able to make sure everybody understands and hears what's going on. Now, this is a little bit more of a challenge as we do more virtual stuff like we're doing right now, but it is happening virtually all over the world with virtual projects running like crazy. And so you're having these meetings virtually. And so people are making that shift and that adjustment. A second ceremony that we might do is what's called the daily stand-up. So daily stand-ups are a 15-minute time box. So you do not go any longer than that. And so you talk about what was accomplished since the previous stand-up. What is the team working on today? What barriers or challenges or impediments is the team experiencing? And so what you're doing, you're giving an opportunity to be able to talk about real brief. However, if this is really something severe that's needing additional time, additional problem solving that you'll see happen sometimes, you're going to take it offline, because what you're going to do is take it offline. You and the team are going to work on it during a different time, not during the stand-up meeting. So the daily stand-up duration is going to be somewhere around 15 minutes. You're not wanting it to last much longer than that. And so you're going to probably set a time. Most will set a time every morning to do this. You could have it after lunch or whatever, but the point is you'll have a special time for doing this. Normally your attendees will be the Scrum Master, the team, the product owner. So the Scrum Master wants to keep it very informal, obviously. What was accomplished? What will be accomplished today? What impediments did you experience? And once again, it's one of your major ways of communicating to the rest of the team. Challenges that people have with some of these is that management does not see value possibly in that 15-minute daily stand-up. And so we've seen this across North America, where managers feel like, well, they're wasting 15 minutes, and they haven't caught on that that's their main communication piece and accountability piece for everyone. Team members are virtual and not sure of the benefit of having a daily stand-up. Many people will verbalize this even in our training classes. My people don't see the benefit of this. And the thing is that how much are they working on a single project? Many people are working on multiple projects. And so a daily stand-up per project might be overkill in some of those situations. So you might find yourself having to make some adjustments in those situations, because your people are not working on just one project like the perfect setting would be. They're working on 5. And so if I've got 5 daily stand-ups per day, that's going to feel like overkill. And the team wants to discuss the challenges maybe longer than 15 minutes. That's going to be something that you'll notice that you have to really curtail, and it turns into a status report rather than a daily stand-up. And so you're not wanting this to happen, even though some of the components from a status do come up in that meeting, and some of it rightly so. Also, with a daily stand-up, team members report the same progress each time without any changes. That's going to be a challenge. That lets you know that team member is not advancing on that project the way they should. They keep reporting the same thing. So being able to talk about that a little bit is going to be important. Team members do not see the meeting as important, and only 50% of the time they're participating or showing up. That's a problem, because that's a piece of information on that project that's not being shared with other people. Or management expects the progress progress report after the daily stand-up. That's recently was something that came up. And so I'm thinking, okay, so what's the difference here? If they're giving a daily stand-up so that they can hold them accountable with that report. And so that report might not be something that, that would be something you would want to talk with management about. Obviously, management's got to oversee it, but is there not a better way than something that we're doing after each daily stand-up? Because management's looking at that daily stand-up like a status meeting. And so that's not really the goal of that. So daily stand-ups can get off topic. And so what do you do when team members want or need more time to discuss an issue or problem with the project? Of course, it's going to happen. We all have had hiccups with our projects. Of course it is. That's, and you're not a bad, you're not a bad team member. You're not a bad product owner. You're not a bad customer to have to deal with this. So a couple of things that can happen. So when they get ready to chase that rabbit in a daily stand-up, because that's normally where it happens, remind the team member of the purpose of the daily stand-up, and that's only going to be lasting 15 minutes. Move the problem-solving conversations to the parking lot temporarily, and then set up a time at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock, whatever you're going to do, to talk about just that problem. And that way you can talk about it, because people are going to need some help possibly in those areas. And if the person continues to take more time in the daily stand-up on their topic, and talk with them privately about it, because the goal is like a round robin. Boom, here's what's happening, here's what I did yesterday, here's what I'm doing today. I didn't have any impediments. And then the next person, you're wanting it to move really, really quick and not suck down the morning. The benefit, obviously, I've already mentioned this, but it's going to be increased communication, accountability, refocuses the priorities of what we're doing and why, and gain insights where help is needed. And so that's the reason why you're doing it with regularity. But if your people are working, let me say it one more time before I leave this point, if your people are working on multiple projects, a daily stand-up on that project might not be the right way to go. It might be every other day, might make more sense on that project because they're working on so many other things. So let's talk about the sprint demo or the sprint review. Depending on what author you read, some will separate the two of these. And so I'm going to leave them together. Most of the material seems to leave them together, but they are called different things. They do separate them sometimes in the material. So the sprint demo is often referred to as a sprint review. It happens at the end of each sprint. So if it's a 4-week sprint, just before that, as soon as that sprint finishes, we do a sprint demo and a sprint review. And so the sprint demo or review takes place at the end. It serves as an opportunity to show a functioning version of the user story, the story points, the deliverables, or the features to the customer. So they're able to see some functionality, not all of it now, just a little bit. So it's not perfect. It hasn't been tested by 400 people. It's just some functionality. So the people who normally attend this will be your development team, the Scrum Master, product owner, and the customer, because you want the customer sitting there to see what's happened and how this works. The agenda items will include talking to the stakeholders about the features and the story points. Scrum Master is going to facilitate it. And then DOD, the definition of done, is reviewed with the attendees. And that definition of done came from the customer, remember? And so it came from the customer, and that's exactly what the product owner is making sure that they adhere to as well. And that's what the team is using as their actual goal out here, is that definition of done. It can last 1 to 2 hours for the team as they're doing this. It is a scheduled meeting. It's not ad hoc, so it's very formal, because you're showing the team, from the team's showing the customer exactly what they have created. And so several frameworks will use some of this: Kanban, Scrum, Agile, and stuff like that. Characteristics of the sprint demo or the review. So you showcase the product or increment to the stakeholders. You promote transparency, allowing others to compare the product increment and the definition of done or scope requirements document. You allow instant feedback. People can talk about what they like, what they don't like. Also, it verifies the completion of a portion of project that the customer wanted, and it lays the foundation for learning and continuous improvement. Why? Because the customer can brag about the stuff they love, the stuff that doesn't feel right or feels clumsy, they can verbalize it, and we already know that instantly before we go into the next sprint. And if it's not working the way the customer wants at all, some of those features might be carried over to the next sprint if the customer and product owner want that. Prepare for the sprint demo and the review. You would select the sprint user stories and features that you're going to showcase, verify the quality and functionality, assemble the review team, who's going to present, who are the SMEs that are going to handle the questions, and do we we have any technical issues that we need to take care of with this? And so you're not presenting every little thing that you did in that sprint necessarily. You're presenting some of the completed items, such as how the functionality is actually going to be working. In the sprint demo, you would have an agenda as well, because this is a formal meeting. And so you'd have openings and welcomes. If everybody doesn't know each other, you're going to do an overview of the sprint deliverable and the goals, provide a live demonstration, talk with the customer representative, handle all concerns and questions, discuss performance metrics and the definition of done. All of this ought to be common knowledge to the customer, because it's come from the customer. And then what are the closing remarks? And then, of course, you thank them, because once again, shortly you're going to start another iteration, and they're going to be part of that sprint review at the end of it. So normally your customers, if they will look at this as giving them value, because they're being able to communicate, you're working on their stuff at the time. So they normally like this kind of setup. Let's look at another ceremony, the retrospective. Very similar to lessons learned. So two kinds of retrospectives, one at the end of the sprint, one at the end of the project. Both should be done in Agile and Scrum. The primary goal of a sprint retrospective is you're going to learn new knowledge from the past experience. We're learning from each iteration. We're learning at the end of the project, so that it can be part of continuous improvement. So the duration of this is normally going to be 1 to 2 hours for a 2-week sprint. So a 4-week sprint would be anywhere from 2 to 4 hours for us to do a retrospective. And so that would just be built into the time of what we're working on and how we're working as a project team. As you look at the dashboard for this, the attendees for this would be your development team, your Scrum Master, your product owner. The agenda items would include the focus on what the team learned in the current sprint, gaining feedback for continuous improvement, discussing what could be improved, because once again, you've got that continuous improvement piece in here. And so that's going to be very important. It's normally going to be an hour for each iteration week. So if you have a 4-week iteration, you could have 4 hours, up to 4 hours for this. Might not need all of that, but I'm saying in general, that's what the kind of the guideline is. It can be used in other frameworks as well. But the retrospective is a very important piece for learning and continuing to evolve. The benefit of sprint retrospectives, it improves why and how for the team. They understand the why we're doing something and how and what's going to be our next approach. It educates the team. And so that's one of the great things, because we'll do better in the future sprints because we understand what went well and what did not go well in this. And it will unlock any hidden concerns, because once again, some people will have some hiccups that maybe they haven't verbalized, and maybe they put out the fire and worked around it like we all have. But the point is, this will give them a chance to say something about it, so that we're not continuing to have those same challenges down the road. In this setting, you want to set the proper stage. Stakeholders have to feel safe to discuss the challenges of the project. No blaming. So this is not looking for a blame game on everything. And that needs to be out of these meetings, because we need to check our position, and we really need to check our egos at the door so that we can talk about these. Seek solutions and ideas without the finger pointing. Discuss the issue and the challenge, seek support for ideas and data, analyze the solution to adjust them for efficiency, but get rid of the data, get rid of the finger pointing, get rid of the blame game, because that's not going to benefit us. We're working to solve something. We expect problems, we expect hiccups, and so we're all working toward that. You're looking for patterns. Is there a pattern of certain things that we're having trouble with? Is there a pattern for a weak area that we're noticing? Are we looking at root causes? Are we still having the same problem in week 6 in iteration 6 that we had in iteration 1, and yet we thought we've had it solved 3 times? I mean, those kind of things let you know that we're missing something. And you're looking for bad processes. As you know, many of these projects are going to be changing because you're bringing technology in. It's going to change how your process functions. It might change the steps of the process. It might nullify half of the process. We don't need it anymore because technology is taking care of it. So what we're wanting to do in these as well is to be able to make sure we've upgraded the processes to where they're working the way we thought they would. We have to be positive and helpful in this atmosphere, because once again, you're wanting your people to be creative. You're wanting your people to say what they're noticing. So demonstrating an upbeat demeanor, supporting active listening, thank people for their honest work, their insights. Even if you don't agree with their insight, I would rather have them share that insight so that we can kind of look and see if it's valid, and then discuss the product backlog refinements to support the retrospective suggestion. We will have to make adjustments to the backlog, and so those refinements, that product owner is going to be re-ranking those features or user stories depending on what they're hearing. The other piece of this would be, and setting up the proper stage, would be using start, stop, start, and continue as a framework in discussing the previous sprint and repeatability of it. If you've not used the start, stop, and continue, it is really a fast-paced, real analysis of discussion with your team. What is it that we think needs to stop from this point on and not have happen in our project? What should we start that we saw that was good? And then what should we continue? So it allows you to be always emphasizing the new stuff, the gaps, and also stopping those things that were disruptive in the project. I thought it was a great small analysis because you're going to talk about it in that order. What do we need to stop in the future iterations? Also, you can use what's called liked, learned, lacked, or longed for. That's all the L's, tongue twister for you. It focuses the discussion to give stakeholders help in focusing on the ideas. What did they like? What did they like about the last iteration? What did they learn from the last iteration? What was lacking? What did you feel like there was a gap that you struggled with? We fixed it. We got it working. We did all that. Well, what was lacking? And then what do you long for? What is something that you are constantly, you're kind of picking up the pattern or the feeling that's happening that you want us to take a look at? So start, stop, and continue. Great little fast-paced discussion point. And this would be your liked, learned, lacked, and longed for that we're talking about. Now, sample sprint retrospective items. So you improve efficiencies by monitoring daily stand-up meetings to remain only 15 minutes. So this could be something that somebody verbalizes. Our retro meetings have our daily stand-up meetings have been lasting 22 minutes, and so we want to make sure they stay 15. So we need to get more focus. Address technical debt by scheduling time to refactor the code. Now, as you know, technical debt is going to be some of the things that we have maybe been putting off about some of the technology that needs either rework or reprogramming or it's in bugs. It could be a lot of different things. And so we finally decide, okay, we can't just keep putting this off. We're going to have to fix some of this stuff so it really works the way it's supposed to. Remove ambiguity and user stories and requirements for clearer goals. Analyze reoccurring issues where previous solutions did not solve those. Remind customers to attend the sprint demos for immediate feedback. So you're doing a demo, but the customer's not there. That kind of defeats some of the purpose because that's a main person you're wanting there. So a sample sprint retrospective agenda could be something like this: welcome and introduction for 5 minutes, data gathering, review of sprint data, the team input using the start, stop, continue technique. You can generate insights for another 20 minutes, identify patterns or root causes that people are picking up on, decide what to do, define action items and assign responsibility, close the retrospective, do a recap and appreciation, thanking everybody, and then documentation and sharing that with the rest of the team, or just putting it in the files so that it will be archived later on. So this would be what you would be doing. So the other little myth that we see, and you can see it here, people say, well, we're doing sprints and we're doing Scrum, so we don't have documentation. None of that's true. The documentation is far less in an Agile or Scrum project, but you're going to have some documentation there. Now, your next ceremony is going to be your product backlog refinement. And so this is what your product owner is doing. And so the ongoing iterative relationship of selecting, prioritizing, and refining the next features, user stories, story points for the project team to complete. So this is the role of a person, not a team. And so the product owner is supposed to be the one doing this, representing the customer. And so it selects the highest priority work for a sprint backlog, and the sprint backlog is enough work for the team to complete in just one sprint. So there's going to be that refinement happening. So the product owner is the one responsible for breaking this down into sprint backlogs, but they don't do it in a vacuum. Like I said, they're talking to the team and the team's talking with them because the team's estimating what that product owner is showing them. And so the product backlog refinement begins by reviewing the prioritized features, And user stories, they discuss dependencies. They consider the Moscow, must have, should have, could have, won't have. All of those are part of the Moscow that you're familiar with. And then they break down the larger features or user stories into smaller, more manageable components. And they estimate the effort for all of the items to verify that that will fit inside one sprint. And so the team is doing the estimation and they're giving feedback to the product owner. And of course, they're adding or subtracting whatever they need for that next sprint. They're creating acceptance criteria for the features or user stories. How do we know that we have reached the level of performance that the customer wants, or the level of output the customer wants? So acceptance criteria has to be clear, no ambiguity. They detail the goals and the outcomes, verify with the team the amount of work the next sprint is realistic. Is it realistic what we're asking for? And the team says, yes, we think we can complete that. So that's why I said it's a collective effort in coming up with this, even though the product owner is technically the one setting that up. Now, let me discuss real quickly here in just a couple of slides hybrid, because many of you are doing some form of hybrid, and some of these ceremonies will fit very well for you. Some maybe are not doing that. So if we look at a hybrid situation, I've referred to it twice. Let me refer to it right now to make sure you understand what I'm talking about. You have part of your project being run in a traditional predictive way, and then part of it is being run in an agile and Scrum manner. And so that would be a hybrid project. And so hybrid can have a lot of flavors. And so just this week in doing training for the Ukrainian project managers, that's what the topic we spent 2 days working with was hybrid project management. So hybrid can have a lot of flavors, can have a lot of looks, depending on how you need hybrid to work in your situation. So when we look at this for Agile and Scrum ceremonies in hybrid, the ceremonies in a hybrid setting would be combined with Agile and Scrum and predictive processes. So some of these ceremonies you might use and some you might not use because yours is a hybrid situation. So you would adjust the framework to a hybrid culture. And so it's going to require some out of the box thinking for that specific project. So your daily stand-ups might be very useful for yours, and yet you might find yourself with the demos. The demos might be something you're doing for your team, and then you might find yourself having to add an additional demo to do separately with the customer for some reason. So what happens is you find yourself having to make adjustments for some of these because your project's so different in some of the areas. There's some common areas of adjustment for hybrid. Responsibilities for estimates and the completion of the work move from the project manager to the team. So if we're doing an actual Agile or Scrum project, we know the team is making the estimate. If you're doing a hybrid project, you might be inheriting those estimates from a project manager. That's okay. It's a hybrid project. That happens to be one of those areas. Customers have a high involvement in feedback. You're going to need that on your hybrid projects as well. Even though the customer might not be as engaged as they would be in a Scrum, they're normally more engaged than they are in traditional. And then projects provide features or products in sprints rather than at the end of the project. And so that might be a place that you really pick up some value because we're doing those retrospectives and we're providing that feedback. The goals shift from command and control to speed, because we're not trying to control everything and make everybody sign off on everything. We're trying to have speed in these areas. So all of your project could be traditional in the opening points of that project. But when you really start actually producing the actual outputs of that project, this might be very much Scrum. And that's why it would be hybrid, because you're doing a Scrum project, but reporting in a traditional manner. And so that's why you would be caught into this. And so then Agile Scrum ceremonies. So certifications, the PMP is still the most respected certification in project management. Considering picking up certifications in both Scrum, Agile, and Scrum Master and Product Owner. All of these are some certifications I wanted to mention. Next month, we're going to be talking about certifications. And just something for you to keep in mind, because when we're talking hybrid and we're talking Agile and Scrum, as you know, the PMP certification, half of the certification is now being tested. PMPs are being tested on Agile. And the reason for that is because project management is understanding that we've got both of these methodologies and frameworks out here, and the current project manager has to understand both, especially if you're running the hybrid like we're just talking about. So you might want to look at some of these. Not all of these certifications are represented by PMI. Some are going to be represented by Scrum Alliance or scrum.org, and those are going to be some references for you. We'll talk about those next month, but you're going to see project managers in the future who are going to have those dual certifications. PMI has the Agile Certified Professional, great certification, but you're seeing more people with certified Scrum Masters and certified Scrum professionals and those type of things. You're seeing a lot more of those out in the industry. And so you might be something for you to consider, once again, for the longevity of your workplace that you have. Now, let me mention a couple of things for you before we kind of wrap some of these pieces up. Next month, this is what we're going to be talking about, is project management certification, an important step for the modern project manager. And so we will be doing the entire webinar talking about different certifications that are out there. And so I'm not an expert on every certification. I focus on the project management certifications that make sense and that we see our clients have. And so there, you might have to have a certification, for an example, in security, data security, that might be something I know nothing about. That might mean an awful lot to you and to your group, but it might not mean anything to the project management group. And so so we're not going to talk about literally every certification, but we're going to talk about a lot of those different certifications and why you might want to consider some of those. Then in 2024, we already have been putting our schedule together for 2024. And so we have 3 free mastermind groups for the PMP mastermind group. So this is for people who are wanting to get their PMP. And so this is going to put them into a 5-day class. They do about an hour a day for 5 days, helps them organize their experience. It helps them understand what the PMP is going to be dealing with. They take a few questions so they can kind of see how they're doing on that test. And so they produce, they start listening to some of the training, some of the videos, but it helps them understand a little better what they have to do to pass the PMP test. So we have these for free. And so people will attend these. In each one of these, we give away a free boot camp to somebody. So we'll have 3 free boot camps being given away next year in these mastermind groups. And so the people are able to attend the boot camp on scholarship and take their tests. So this is going to be something, if you have somebody who wants to do their PMP, but there's a lot of ambiguity, they don't really know what they need to do, this is going to be something very free for them to be able to sign up for. And then, of course, all of our webinars are already on the web or on our site for next year. We've got all 2024 on there. You can sign up. And then we also have a boot camp. Our last boot camp is in December here, December 4 through 7 for 2023. And so that'll be a virtual 4-day boot camp. And so that's our last one that we're offering. We will have 6 boot camps in 2024. These 2 are already on the calendar for you, but we do have 6. We will do one every other month for 2024 is what we're going to be doing. So that way you can kind of see this and be part of this. So as we kind of bring this to a close, let me just encourage you, whatever you've thought about Scrum, if you didn't like Scrum or Agile, you need to be open to it and consider looking at it. It might not fit your type of projects, but it is definitely fitting other projects around the world. And so this is definitely something that when you're sitting there talking with people, you're going to want to know a certain amount about, and a certain amount of what the terminology is for that. So it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing to use. It's a good thing for you to be able to use in the future. So consider trying something like this. Now, with that said, I hope you have a great Thanksgiving, because that's going to be coming up. Hope you have a Merry Christmas. And so I'll see you in December as we talk about whether or not people should be certified. And we'll talk about how those certifications, what we might consider for those certifications. So I hope you and your family have a wonderful holiday season. Okay, everyone. Bye, folks. See you next month. Okay. Bye now.